here I am.
That's pretty broad.
So,
Well, my life began in Santaquin, Utah, September 13th, 1934. I
These
was
candles
born
light.
at home
are they?
and remember living in Santaquin for a few years. Then we moved to Payson. And one time when we were still in Santaquin, I fell out of a car moving about 50 miles an hour. And thank heavens I hit on my head, otherwise it'd been serious. But at that time they had no anesthesia and they had to pick the rocks out of my head with pickers. And they said I just screamed and everything was covered with blood. But the reason I fell out of a car was we bought a straw hat and the wind was blowing because the window was down, and so somebody said to roll up the window, so I grabbed the handle. It happened to be the door handle rather than the window handle. And that old Mercury, the doors flopped out this way rather than the way they should, and so the wind grabbed it and pulled me out. Anyway, don't remember a thing about it other than what I've been told. Dad was a miner, worked in Eureka most of his life, but had jobs in Idaho and Montana, Nevada, and we moved around quite a bit. But our home in
Should we pause it for 1 second?
Santaquin, we had to move because they built a freeway right through our property, right where our house was at. So they forced us to sell. And we moved to Payson, down on 8th West, and right at the edge of where the farm started. And I was raised to go to school at Payson Junior High and Payson High School, which I graduated in 1953, and joined the Air Force. Well, I went to Snow College, then joined the Air Force. I was released from the Air Force early because Dad got sick, and I went home to work. I worked part-time and went to school at BYU full-time and lived at home in Payson. I graduated from BYU in 1958.
When did you help build the roads in Yellowstone?
Uh,
Is that in between Snow or BYU?
no, trying to think here. It was before I graduated from the Y, so it had to be about 55, 56. We built a road right along the Snake River up in Wyoming, and it was supposed to be a scenic highway. Made good money working, driving trucks. Always seemed to have a good job if I wanted it. And then went back to school, finished up. And then I went to California and worked for North American Aviation upon graduation from the Y. I worked there about a little over a year. Decided I'd better go back to school and get my master's, so I returned to Provo and went to work in marriage counseling. And got a teaching certificate, and Provo School District called me and said they wanted to talk to me about coming to work for them. I went and sat down and talked with them. They offered me a job, and I accepted because I could go to school and still teach and get I can say a fair income, but a low income teaching to live on. At that time, while I was working at Farrer Junior High School, I needed a date for a dance because the kids had kind of coaxed me into bringing someone. And I knew that Jean was home, so I called her and she agreed to go dancing with me. And when she got there, she found a few other young women there with their brothers and sisters who they had brought them with them to meet me because the students were trying to get me lined up with their sister, not their brother.
So
Anyway.
how did you meet Mom again? You went on a double date down at Snow, right?
No, we weren't double dating.
Oh.
Bob, my roommate, was from Spanish, and he took out Jean a few times, and I met her that way.
What was Bob's last name?
Atwood,
Atwood.
Robert
Oh,
Atwood.
that was Bob Atwood, huh?
Yeah, he was working on his clinical psychologist doctorate. Seemed like he was at Y for years. But anyway, we dated and started enjoying each other's company, and one thing went to another, and we got engaged and got married in August the 3rd of 1961. And Jean had graduated from Utah State and was looking for work. And she had written a letter to Davis School District in Davis County, Utah, and they called her up to interview, and while they were talking to Jean, they asked her, well, where does your husband work? She said, well, he's a school teacher. And they said, would he be interested in coming to work for us? And so
Sight unseen.
they hired me because they wanted Jean.
She
No,
must have
they
done
didn't.
she must have done a good job in her interview.
He really liked Jean because she wrote a real excellent letter in his terms. He was a old English teacher, and he was impressed with her writing ability.
Who was that, Mom, again?
It was Horton Miller. And when I went into his office to be interviewed, Jack was with me, and I'd forgotten his name, and all that came to my head was Horton. And I put my hand out and said, it's nice to meet you, Superintendent Horton. And afterward,
Superintendent Miller.
I thought, oh, what an idiot I was.
Well, keep this off the camera, but anyway, I got to know Horton quite well. And he was quite friendly with me. And he said to me one day, he said, Jack, he said, I want to tell you how to hire a good secretary. I said, well, I'd be interested in knowing. He said, well, get her to stand up next to a wall, put her feet to touch the baseboard.
I'm not sure if I want to know the rest
And
of
if
the
You
story.
don't want this
And when she's
recorded.
standing there, if there's 4 points touching, hire her. I laughed so hard, I couldn't help it. He'd never been that
I can't
informal.
believe he would.
Said that.
He was very strict and
Yeah.
straight-laced, and
But
I
he-
didn't know
He let
him
his hair
personally.
down once in a while, and he kind of shocked me because I'd never heard him talk that way.
So, Dad, one of the things I wanted to ask you too is when you were younger, you used to tease your brothers and sisters a lot, and then you
Me?
joined, and then talk to us about how you became active in church because your dad was inactive.
My dad wasn't a member.
Yeah. Well, your dad wasn't a member. Your mom was, but was she active?
Our life in Santa Quinn and Payson, we had 7 children, and I was the 3rd, the oldest. And my older brother George was about 245, 250 in high school. He used to sit down and pound me on the chest, unmercifully, till I would end up crying. But I found out one way of getting even with him, because when he went me up, I'd get up and I'd kick him in the shin just as hard as I could. And he never could catch me running on one leg. And we used to fight quite a bit. And one day we were fighting, and poor Dolly was in a high chair next to the old coal stove. Somehow she got knocked onto the stove
Oh,
and burned her quite badly. That's the last time we really fought. I do remember one time when Mother and Dad were away, I decided I was going to lock Sylvia, my older sister, out of the house because she was being obnoxious or something. And
You
so
wanted to tease somebody
he
more
was
than
probably being
likely.
obnoxious.
I locked the screen door. Sylvia got so mad she got an axe and chopped down the screen door. Well, I thought, boy, Sylvia, you're in trouble when Mother and Dad get home. Well, when Mother and Dad get home, I got hell. She didn't say a thing to Sylvia. And I thought, boy, that's unfair. Anyway, we had a good life. We were poor, but we really didn't know it. We raised everything. We had all kinds of animals and fruit and vegetables. And Mother would bottle. It seemed like she spent all of her summers bottling, and we always had a full basement of bottled peaches and pears and anything you could bottle, Mother had it. We'd make our own head cheese from pork. We'd make our own pickles in brine. We'd make our own soap. And so it was sure a rough soap to use because it just really made your hands red. There was so much lye in it.
Tell them what head cheese is.
Oh,
Head cheese is a cheese made from
those words
No
shouldn't be.
comments from
Those words
video.
should not be in the same sentence.
the part off the head, the meat off the head. And it was pretty good.
So when you told us about when you joined the church,
Okay, in Santaquin, we had a 5 or 10 acres. I can't remember how much property we had, but just south of us was a brother in Openshaw who was a farmer, and every summer he'd raise about 3 to 4 acres of watermelons. They were the best watermelons in the world. George and I'd sneak through the fence, go out in the middle of the patch and break open 2 or 3 watermelons and just eat the hearts. Oh, they were good. Well, somehow Brother Openshaw came into his farm when we were there eating watermelons, and we took off. George got through the barbed wire fence,
wait a second.
but I got caught up in the barbed wire, and Brother Openshaw caught me. Well, at that time, my mother wasn't very active in the church. Dad was not a member. My dad was a very strong disciplinarian. Boy, you knew it when he disciplined. And Brother Openshaw said, Jack, he said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you 2 choices. You start coming to church, or I'm going to tell your dad about stealing my watermelons. Well, I know that I'd be in trouble with Dad, so I said, Brother Openshaw, I'll come to church. That's how I got started going to church, because Mother not being active, there was no motivation for us to go, and it seemed like on Saturdays and Sundays, we were up in the mountains fishing, camping, because Dad left to go out in the mountains and enjoy himself.
Okay, Dad. You gonna talk about your life?
My life,
Uh-huh.
well, I've talked about some earlier, so I'll try to pick up from there. We moved between Santaquin and Payson a couple of times. I went to elementary school in Santaquin. My first year was in Payson though, and then we moved to Santaquin. I went to elementary there for a few years. Then we moved back to Payson, and I started at Payson Junior High School. So I went to Payson Junior High School, and then I went to Payson High School, and I graduated in 1953. I got a small scholarship from Snow and went down to, thought I'd play football. But I got there and started playing, and I was so small for the position I was playing that they were just killing me. So I decided football was not my expertise. So I went to school there and decided that I was going to join the Air Force with a friend of mine. And so we joined, and his name was Paul Junior Hurst, and he went in the service, and because he'd had some real physical health problems, they let him out of the service. So I stayed in for a year, almost 2 years.
In the service?
Yeah, I was stationed at the Air Base Davis, Davis Lackland. I'm trying to think back the names of them.
Where were they at?
Texas, in San Antonio, Texas. And then I went to school in electronics to Denver. And then when I finished my electronic training, they sent me to Tucson, Arizona, to a SAC base.
And that's where you worked on airplanes?
Yeah.
What did you do for them?
Davis Monthan. My electronics training was in the bomb nav system, where that we repaired the bomb navigation on the big B-47 and B-52 bombers. When I got to Tucson, though, we found out that they had 150 excess K-system mechanics. That was our title there. And so I was so bored, I would take anything I told them, and they put me into the photography department there, and I would load the cameras as the big reconnaissance bombers flew out, and then I would have to unload the cameras and take them to the photography development. And that lasted for a while, and
I imagine they used film then, they didn't have anything digital, everything was on film.
oh yeah. Dad got sick back in 1955, and I told my CO, Captain, I can't think of his name, that my father had gotten sick, and he said, well, he said, if you want to go home, I'll support you getting out of the service, because they had so many excess K-system mechanics. And I got a letter from my bishop and submitted it, and within 5 days I was on my way home. But I wasn't discharged from the Air Force until I'd put in a total of 7 years after I left Tucson, before I was officially discharged.
What did you do during that time, that 7 years?
Between the time I got home, I was living at home, I started to work, and decided that I needed to get my education finished, so I enrolled at BYU. I used my scholarship from the service to pay for my tuition and books, etc. That was called the GI Bill. I used that. I graduated in 1958.
And did you have to, Grandpa was hurt, his back was hurt,
Yeah,
right? He had a mine shaft.
Dad was in a mine accident, but it was the result of the accident that he got arthritis and couldn't use his hands.
What's the Rizzoli?
A result.
Oh,
Result.
okay,
He
I'm
got
sorry. I
arthritis
missed
and he couldn't work, so I was home helping the family. But we all decided education was the most important thing. Mother always pushed me on education. So when I graduated in '58, I graduated in sociology, mathematics, and got a teacher's certificate. I taught, oh no, I went to California immediately after graduation, excuse me, and I worked for North American Aviation down there for a year and a half. And our contracts were all getting filled, and there wasn't much work to do, but they still kept us on there. And I decided, well, I was going to go back to school. And that's when I went back to work on my master's in marriage counseling. And that's when I started dating your mother. And she was so delighted I was going to be a marriage counselor. But I lost interest in that and decided that after teaching U.S. history at Farrer Junior High School in Provo for a year, that I would move into education counseling. And I did that. I went there at BYU until I got my master's in counseling and administration. By the time I got my master's, I'd started to work in Davis School District in Davis County, Utah, and taught there a few years in history and social studies, American history, etc. And then I was hired to start a new counseling program at a brand new junior high school in Bountiful, Utah, Mill Creek Junior. I went and worked there for a few years, and then I was notified that there was an NDEA fellowship available in Laramie, Wyoming, at the University of Wyoming, and so I applied for that and got it.
What's NDEA?
National Defense Education Act, providing scholarships for people to get advanced degrees. So we went to University of Wyoming for a year and a half, and I got my EDS there, Educational Specialist, and I finished all my classes for my PhD. I thought, well, I'll go back to work and then finish that in the summertime
they wouldn't give you the degree until you had been away from school for 2 years,
Right.
because he had to show that he was going to use it.
Right.
Well, my scholarship was to get the educational specialist, and the restriction was that if I wanted a PhD, that I did have to wait for 2 years. And I came back to Davis District, started working, and they wanted me to go into administration. And so I applied for that, and then just felt like that I didn't have time to get off from work to apply for my PhD, finish it up. Go ahead. Tell about living in Laramie.
Well, Jack received this scholarship, it was a wonderful scholarship. There were only 12 in the nation who got to have this scholarship, and we moved to Laramie. And the day we went out to find a place to live, we kept coming across all these telephone poles that were lying out by the side of the road. And some were laying horizontal to the road, and some were laying the other
Vertical.
direction.
And this was in July.
Yeah, and then we'd see some workmen here and there, and we didn't know what had gone on, but come to find out, they had had a storm that had taken down the telephone
Snowstorm.
poles, and we didn't know quite what we were getting into, but we looked at apartments there, and it was really, they were really interesting. Most of them had wallpaper that had big pink or red roses, and
Just the kind you like.
yeah, just the kind we liked. And we finally came across this little triplex, or was it a duplex?
What was it? There were 2 duplexes facing each other.
Anyway, and we decided to rent that. And that winter, Laramie didn't get much snow, but that winter it got down to 70 degrees below zero with the wind chill factor.
Of 50 degrees.
And
Wow.
they said the snow never melted, it just wore out because the wind kept brushing it back and forth. In our front yard, over just a little ways, was the University of Wyoming Stadium. And when there was a game, it was quite loud and that, but we liked I think her name was Schaefermeyer, that we rented from, and she was good, and you had to come in a driveway to get where the tripod was, or the triplex was, and you had to pass this little fast food place or restaurant, I don't know which it was, and people would stop and get drinks there, and they would have little receipts, and people would just throw them away, and they'd be all over the ground. So Leslie was 2 years old when we were there. Tracy was 5, and we didn't have Stephanie yet. Anyway, Leslie picked up a receipt from the drive-in and took it over to Mrs. Schaefermeyer, and she had the cutest little voice.
She was paying the rent.
And she told her she was here to pay the rent and handed her a receipt. And she got such a big kick out of it.
Well, Mrs. Schaefermeyer gave her a treat every time she did it, too.
So that was fun. And at that time, Leslie loved this little white kitty with red ears and a red tail and that. And she found she couldn't ride her tricycle and hold on to the kitty.
It wasn't a live kitty.
It was just a stuffed
stuffed.
animal. So she figured out, she stuck the tail in her mouth, and then she'd go down the street on her tricycle. We didn't have very much in the way of sidewalks, and that worked just fine for her. So it was a fun time. Alan and Lois Reveland lived in the other side of the duplex, and they became very good friends. They were really nice people, and they had 2 little boys, Chad. No, did they have 3?
Mhm. And 2 boys, Chad
Chad and Randy.
Yep.
And They were about the same ages as Tracy and Leslie, and they played together all the time. And Lois said her mattresses were old and she let them jump on her mattresses. Well, ours weren't old. We'd had to buy new mattresses to go to Laramie because ours were too big. They didn't fit. I think we were in a double bed, weren't we?
Well, we had one double bed and two twin beds.
And two twins. So, now I forgot where I was.
Just the kids would jump on the mattresses.
Oh, they'd come to my house and they'd jump. I'd get so angry because I thought we paid so much money for those mattresses. But they were cute little boys, and
They were probably pretty fast when they jumped. They ran.
They had a good friendship there, and Lois and Ellen were just great neighbors.
One thing I was going to ask both of you is when you named us, do you remember why you named us what you named us? Maybe you could talk about when each of us were born, and then we can go back to Laramie.
I don't know why Tracy.
I don't know where Tracy came from. I just liked it. And I don't remember of knowing anyone. And I spelled it differently because I wanted you were unique, and I wanted you to be unique in your name. And you probably had trouble your whole life with people spelling it wrong, just like I've had people spell mine wrong all of my life. Leslie, at that time, Dad wanted Paula, or there were 3 names he had. Do you remember what they were?
I don't remember.
I remember Paula was one, and that was a student he had that was really good, and he thought she was cute. And I thought, I'm not naming my baby after a cute little student that he had. And anyway, Leslie came up, and we both liked it, I think. He liked it. And so we named Leslie that. And then when Stephanie was born, he still wanted to name her Paula or one of these other names.
He's giving you a look.
We were, the day we were ready to leave the hospital, we hadn't chosen a name. And the nurses were having a fit because then they had to send us home with baby Shell, not with the name. So we decided right then and there that we'd call her Stephanie. And I struggled over how to spell it because I wanted something different, but we ended up with the traditional spelling for Stephanie. I thought about Steffanie, but I thought she'd get called Fanny.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I don't want to do that. So we named her Stephanie. And we've been happy ever since with all 3 names.
So talk with us a little bit about your feelings when you had your babies. When you brought them home from the hospital.
When we brought you home from the hospital, Tracy, my mother came up to be with me. Well, you were born with hyaline membrane disease, which is where the lungs fill with water.
Not water.
No, well, striated.
Fiber.
And when you'd breathe, your lungs would just pant. And at that time, John F. Kennedy had been in the White House, and they had a baby, and the baby died, and it had the same disease, the hyaline membrane. And I kept thinking, if they couldn't save the President of the United States' baby, how were they going to save mine?
And Tracy was in the hospital for, what, 3 weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And
The
we had a
nurses.
blessing.
And the nurses would come in, remember that?
Talk a little louder,
The
Dad.
nurses would come in and ask, what time did the Shell baby pass away? Because they'd all given up hope that you would make it. But every day they were told that you're still alive and holding your own. And after 2 weeks, you were on the incubator for quite a while to help breathing. And then after 2 weeks, we were able to take you home, but they told us not to let anyone get close without a face mask. And so everybody that came to see you at our house, I made them put a face mask on, and some of them didn't like it.
I don't think I don't remember that, but I do remember the day we brought her home. We just put her in the bassinet and whatnot, and Dad had gone to the store for something, and somebody knocked on the door, and it was Kent and Grace Larson. And he had to stop to tell them on the way to the store, and I wasn't going to tell anybody because I didn't want germs and people coming in, and I was a little irritated that he did that. But you made it through, and you were a pretty good baby. I can't remember having problems.
She was small.
You were, I think she was born at 5 and then went down to 4 pounds and something. And then you just started to take off, and you were healthy all the time that I remember. You had a hernia surgery at the age of 5, which...
Or second grade.
Before you get there,
First grade, second, I don't know.
we were told by the doctors at the hospital there was a good chance, because they'd have to give you so much oxygen, that you'd have some brain damage or be deaf.
The doctor said, if she lives, she may be deaf or blind or both.
And so I'd walk behind you and clap my hands and you'd move. I was just double checking everything all the time.
And then we'd
For a
run
short
our
time.
finger past your eyes, and you followed them. So we felt truly blessed that you turned out to be not normal, but extra normal.
And your mother made a promise to the Lord, and we were praying for you to live. And what was that promise, dear?
I told him if he'd let you live and have a normal life, that I would do everything I could to encourage you to go on a mission. And he truly blessed you. And we were very, very grateful for that.
At that time, we lived at 173 East, 800 North in Bountiful. We had a lot of good friends in the neighborhood because all the families were RA pretty well and young children. And that it was a great place to raise a young family because everybody was strong in LDS. Well, most everybody. We had a few.
Karma
problems.
Poindexter.
We had lots of good memories there,
We
playing in the
did.
backyard, and there were lots of good
And we had
memories.
the stream behind us.
Hmm.
That flooded every now and again.
I remember panning for gold, going out and playing with the guys. The girls wanted to go play Barbies, and I wanted to
You
go out
always
and play
played
with
with Troy Johnson and Jeffrey Larson.
Yep,
You were 3 buds.
yep.
One time, we lived on 800 North, and on 750 North, they were resurfacing the road. And the man there told you, all 3 of you, not to stand on the road because it would burn you if you got on it. And you were barefoot. I don't know about the boys. But you come running home and you had the black on your foot a little bit. And you had stepped on the road. I guess you didn't believe him. And he came by a few minutes later and wanted to make sure you were all right. And I remember one time, the first little swimming pool I bought you. It was probably no bigger than that. And I filled it with water out on the front yard where the sun was. And then I let it sit there for a while to warm up. And I put you in your swimming suit and took you out, and you looked at it, and you didn't know what to do. And I said, well, you can get in it. And you giggled. You stepped in it and giggled, and I said, you can sit down in it. And you had the most fun with that little swimming pool.
And Leslie, remember, she was, what, 2 or 3, teaching the older kids how to ride
Ride a bike. She learned to ride a bike at 3. And Lisa Smith, who was 4, and Julie Griffiths was 4, and Leslie was out in the middle of the road teaching them how to ride her bike because they didn't know how. And Marianne Larson she took a long time. She was very cautious about riding a bike.
Do you remember when Leslie was born? Anything you can share with her about when you brought her home from the hospital and your feelings?
Well, babies bring their own love, and there was always love with every child. When you were born, it was a very worrisome time because we didn't know if you'd live or not. But Leslie was born, everything seemed to be all right, and we loved her, and
There are a few
And-
things about Leslie that we always joked about and laughed about, and that was the fact that anything new, she wore to bed with her clothing.
shoes.
Or her new shoes.
I remember her going to bed with her new shoes on.
And she would say, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
She would say, I'm tired.
Leslie would go to sleep anywhere we
She
found
did.
her.
I took a picture of her on top of, do you remember the old toy box we had? Dad had started to make it for a cedar chest. And it was very big. It was yay high and that. And the toys that wouldn't break, we just put in there. Well, she fell asleep on top of all these toys, and they were just, I don't know how she could be comfortable, but she laid there and went to sleep. Then another time I took a picture of her on the front porch. All of you had been out swimming in the front yard, and she got tired and laid down on our front porch at 800 North. She had an animal cracker, half chewed, in her mouth, and she was sound asleep with that little animal cracker.
Well, another time she was sitting on the toilet sound asleep.
Yeah, I took her picture.
And another time she had pulled out a drawer in her dresser
She took everything out of it.
and laid in the drawer and fell asleep.
I remember her doing that in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Remember the bathroom drawer with all the hair nets, and she fell asleep there too.
Well, she also, the cupboard in the kitchen that had Tupperware and tons of little things in it. It was yay tall. She'd put everything out and crawl in that. She liked places where she could hide.
Cozy.
Yeah, they were cozy and nice to her. And my dad stopped by one time with some friends. They were traveling from a trip, and he wanted them to come and see how darling Leslie was. She had a cute, chubby little face and pretty eyes, and
Cute little smile.
her hair was dark, and he thought she was so cute he had to show her. You think of anything else along
Well,
that line?
Leslie's a feisty little kid. She'd stand up for her friends. And one day she was down to Dick Johnson's, and they were just west of us. And he had found an old broken umbrella.
Of which she and Marianne Larson had one alike.
And he picked it up and threw it in the garbage can. She saw that and went over and stuck her finger towards his face and says, "What, dear?"
You shouldn't do that, or don't throw away my friend's umbrella, or she chewed him out, and she had her finger. She knew what she was
And Dick
supposed
was
to do.
laughing so hard he couldn't say much because here she was, little character, just telling Dick off.
I remember one time, it was when I first started to let her go outside by herself, and she'd only been out 3, maybe 4 minutes. It was just, I hadn't even gone to check on her. And Catherine Schmidt called me on the phone, and she said, I think I saw your daughter just go past my house on a bicycle. And I said, she hasn't had time to get there. She said, I'm pretty sure it's yours. And she'd gone off. I don't know where she was going, but it was her, and I was glad she was safe because that was a busy road.
Yeah, that was the main street, wasn't it? The main road there.
I want to talk about Tracy now.
Yeah, I'm
Ours.
trying.
Stephanie, you mean?
No, we
Tracy.
haven't said
Oh.
much about you.
That's okay.
I remember you wanted to earn some money one summer. And I had a friend who was a farmer and had tomatoes and corn and so forth. So I'd take Tracy over and we'd buy some corn and tomatoes. I'd bring her back and put her on the
The
corner
street corner
of Main Street,
and 750.
and she would sell tomatoes and corn, and just got such a big kick out of it because she was making some money. And
I remember
people were-
having my muffin tin.
Yeah, and people were just stopping like mad to buy too. She
You
had a
were
pretty good-
very refined and polite and loved to be of service.
but
I
she-
think we raised that corn, didn't we?
No.
Didn't we raise it? I always
We
thought
bought
we
it.
raised it. Well, I remember you when you did the landscaping, we would trade the landscaping so you could plant corn and tomatoes on that lady's property, but maybe that was just for our family.
Yeah, I can't remember that, but I know that Bill,
Tingy?
was it Tingy?
Mm-hmm.
He had the farm.
Yeah, he worked for me as a
Janitor.
custodian at,
Yeah.
at Viewmont, and he and I got to be friends, and he'd always give me special deals on stuff, and Tracy wanted to earn some money, so I thought that would be a good experience for her to learn.
I think that was in
Silly.
5th grade. I did that, 4th or 5th grade.
We did it for a couple of summers, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
And don't think she made a lot of money, but she certainly made
She
some.
enjoyed you enjoyed what you were doing.
But that was her first experience learning to sell.
And you did well at it.
So what about Stephanie when Stephanie was born? Then we can start going back through your life, Dad.
Stephanie was a very easy child to raise.
The easiest of all of you, especially easier than Leslie.
We probably got more oriented towards raising the three of you when Stephanie was born. And we just remember how easy it was to raise her. And she was such a good kid. No problem, very mindful. And she and Leslie kind of doubled up against Tracy. They were,
Tracy always
Quite close.
wanted to mother those two.
and they didn't like it. I chuckled at Tracy. Tracy was always ambitious, hardworking. In fact, all her kids were. And I remember when she was kind of a night manager at Porky's, and also at the taco
Taco
place.
time.
Taco time.
Fast food places on Main Street in Centerville.
Tracy, when I was working at Viewmont, I have mentioned this, my first experience, no, that was in my second experience, because I started out as a vice principal at Mill Creek for a few months, and Matt Galt, my principal, was so happy with the things I was doing. One day he was being talked to by Burnell Wrigley, our school superintendent, Davis District. And Matt was telling him how everything just worked perfectly on registration. And
Oh yeah, I
how
remember.
well Jack was doing. And about a week later, Burnell called Matt and said, well, you've been so high on Jack, he said, I'm gonna move him over to Viewmont if you'll accept. And so he called me in and told me he wanted me to go to Viewmont. And I said, well, if that's what you want, I'll go.
You'd only been at Mill Creek for just a few months.
Yeah, as a vice principal, I'd worked there as a counselor before I went to Wyoming to work on my doctorate. And I wasn't quite sure about Viewmont because just before the superintendent called me in, Al Flake had confronted a student that had a .30-30 rifle and a knife. And Al had to physically take the gun and the knife away from him, and Al got cut up from the knife. And I thought, do I want to go there? Also, just before that, we had a young girl who was kidnapped by
Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy,
That was when you were vice principal.
Yeah, well, no, that's before I went over.
Oh, I was thinking it was.
Yeah, or else I just had barely gotten
I think
there.
you just barely gotten there because I remember you having to go to Belva's home, Belva Kent, who I worked with at Franklin, and tell the parent.
And
What was the girl's
it
name?
was a play.
Debbie Kent.
Debbie Kent.
A play or something.
Yeah, I was playing at Viewmont that night, and Ralph Bundy had come by in his Volkswagen, I think it
Ted
was.
Bundy.
Ted Bundy.
Ted
Yeah.
Bundy. And it was a long time after that they found that Ted Bundy was the one who had done it, but they never did find her body.
Yeah.
But
That
he
was
had
a sad
taken-
situation.
Very sad. He had taken the handle off the passenger door on the inside so that once somebody got in there, they had
couldn't
no
get
way
out.
to get out. I guess you could roll the window down, but
That might be gone too, you never know.
yeah, that might have been gone. So he was a very wicked man. I remember them showing, I think it was 6 or 8 pictures in the newspaper of different disguises that he'd been in. And he looked different in every one of them. If you looked at his eyes, you could probably tell, but I know that I thought you wouldn't recognize him as the person.
He killed how many girls?
I can't
6 or
remember.
8.
He was a serial
Quite a
killer.
few.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wasn't quite sure I wanted to go to be at Viewmont, but
Let's pause it for 1 second.
when Leslie's going up, we could go on a trip somewhere. And I had a hard time remembering where we went on it. But Leslie could almost tell you the street, what we did. Just marveled at her memory that she had of that activity. And I was sure that, and watching her, that she had a photographic memory on a lot of things.
She did. She was
Didn't forget them.
really,
she-
she still is really smart.
But she could have been a straight A student if she'd have wanted. But I think Leslie was Leslie and did her thing her way. And that you couldn't change that.
Well, and
Okay, one thing, hold on. That means our memory's out?
well, it says record at the top.
Yeah, so I think it's still recording. So
We
maybe
Can you play it back?
press it, maybe press stop, let's see if we can play it back.
Is stop the same button?
Yeah,
we can,
it says it's recording,
hi there,
so it
how's
must,
the world treating you?
must be working.
Okay, you ready? I think we're gonna start. We'll move to Centerville.
Dang, I find myself like this. And then when I'm stressed out, I go. Who does that? All the time, your whole life you go.
Honey, I'm recording now. Did you want me to record?
Oh,